Hello everybody, Eric the Green back here, and this is a Rabbiteye blueberry tour update video. And I want to start this off by saying that I've never used any fertilizers of any kind or soil additives like sulfur to any of the blueberry plants. All I use is mulch, heavy leaf or pine needle mulch, and a lot of people use sulfur to acidify the soil, but sulfur is also used as an antifungal application in organic gardening. So I don't want sulfur or anything interfering with the important mycorrhizal association that the plants have. So I don't use anything on the blueberries. These are planted in the soil and mulched. And that being said, we'll start out. This is a Tiff Blue, and it has some great growth this year, and it has some berries here, but the Tiff Blues haven't been that productive so far, but it's still a young plant. It's about 4 or 5 years old here, and it has a new plant that came up over here away from the main stem. That's Tiff Blue, and this is a Premier, and that is a Climax bush, and they were the same age as the Tiff Blue, but I didn't water them as good as they should have been the first year they were here, and I had to dig them up. They died back, so I had to dig them up and pot them up, get them back healthy, and then put them back out last year. So they've grown really well, and they're really doing great now. Rabbiteye blueberries, and I think all blueberries, that first year need a lot of water. Don't let them dry out that first year, and then they're pretty tough. These are really tough after the first year in the ground, so just be careful that first year to keep them good and watered. And this is a Premier plant, growing pretty good, nice new growth, and has quite a few berries on it. Now Premier is a great vigorous growing plant, but the berries, they have to be really ripe to have their best flavor. Before they're really ripe, they do sometimes have a bitter flavor, but they get big too. So Premier is a nice plant to have. And that's another Premier back there in the back. But this one here in the front is the massive Climax blueberry. Now this thing, Climax is the most vigorous blueberry that I've grown, I think. A lot of new growth on that, and look at all the berries in here. And they're a lot bigger than last year. We've had a lot of rain, and Climax has a problem blooming too early and getting hit by those late spring freezes. But this year we didn't have a hard late spring freeze. Even though it's been really cool and wet and rainy, we didn't have a late freeze, so they have really done good. Climax is kind of a short bush. It's as wide as it is tall. All right. Now this one over here, this is another Tiff Blue, and once again it's growing great, but there's just not a lot of production here. There's some berries, but it's not that much. This one here, my dad planted years and years ago at his house, and it didn't do that great. It was a couple of feet tall, not looking that great. My mom told me a couple of years ago to dig it up if I wanted it, so I did. I planted here, mulched it real good, and it's really taken off. It's about 5 feet or so now, really bushed out wide, and it's got some pretty good production this year on the blueberries. Now Tiff Blue tastes really great. I think that's what this is because of the growth habit and the foliage color, but I can't be sure, but I think this is a Tiff Blue. All right, we'll go up on the hill and check out some more blueberries. Okay, here we are at a Brightwell blueberry bush. Now this is new this year. I picked it up at a store here in town, and it's a a national chain. It's not really a big box store, maybe a medium box store, but it's anyway, it was a healthy plant when I got it. It started to have, I noticed when I got home that it had some black tip dieback on some of the newer leaves, which is just a disease that blueberries, rabbiteye blueberries, get sometimes. It's usually not that big a deal, and when they're in the ground and healthy and established, it doesn't really bother them at all. But this one I had to cut off some of the new growth on this side, but it's doing good now. Got some good growth right here, and even has some nice berries on it. All right, new Brightwell. Okay, these two plants here are the first two of the 4 new varieties that I've planted this year, and these are all 4 new varieties were released by the University of Georgia. And this first one here is Alapaha, if I'm saying that right, and seems to be a really healthy tree or bush, and it's got some nice berries on it right there. But one trait with this one and the Vernon that we'll look at here in a little bit, they bloom later in the season than most blueberries, rabbiteye blueberries, and they ripen earlier than other ones. So they have a shorter bloom to fruiting time. And that late bloom really helps to escape those late spring freezes that we have so often. But it's got some more berries down in there. Alapaha. And this one is Okalakani, named after a river there in Georgia. And this plant is pretty awesome. It's got some great new growth on it, but just look at the mass of berries that this thing has set. Really amazing. And I know that they say to pull all the blooms, pull all the fruit off of plants the first year after you plant them in the ground, but I really want to try, especially blueberries, when I plant them. And I've never had a problem. I've never had it set the plant back in any way to leave the fruit and the blooms on it the first year. I think plants are smart. They're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And if this plant did not have the energy to produce those berries, it would drop them off on its own. So it's not dropping them off. I'm going to leave them. Never had a problem with it. Great growth, healthy plant. And I want to try some Okalakani blueberries. All right, now this is the third new variety I have. It's from the University of Georgia also. This is Vernon. And this one, just like the Alapaha, and maybe more so, blooms later and ripens earlier. Now, there's a few berries on it this year, and some nice new growth. Not as many berries, obviously, as the Okalakani or the Alapaha, but that's okay. That's okay. It's a healthy plant. I'm sure we'll have a lot next year. But this is Vernon. Okay, now this one is the 4th and last variety that I'm going to show that was released by the University of Georgia. This one is called Kruer, named after Dr. Kruer that worked at the blueberry program there. And it has huge blueberries. I think this is one of the latest releases from there. It has blueberries supposed to be the size of a quarter. And there was one released before this named Titan that has blueberries that big. But this one I think is supposed to have better flavor and maybe more vigorous growth habit. And you can see all this new growth just this year. And it's got a few berries on it. this one dropped a lot of its berries, which is what I was saying earlier. It was smart. It didn't want them this year, so it dropped them. But there's a couple on here, and I don't know how big they're going to get this year. There's some down in there, but look forward to trying this and seeing how it does. This one is Kruger. All right, this is the biggest Brightwell blueberry that I have growing here, and this one was planted last year. And Brightwell doesn't seem to have the vigor that I think it ought to. Some of the other plants have. It has some berries on it, and the thing about Brightwell is the berry quality is just amazing. The flavor is amazing, like blueberry candy. The best blueberry that I've tried, and I haven't tried the new varieties yet, so there may be one in there better, but this is a Brightwell, and it just doesn't seem as vigorous. Now it does have some new growth, and maybe when it gets established, it will have better vigor. We'll see. I really hope so. Berry quality is the best I've had. Okay, this is the healthiest Tiff Blue plant that is growing, and it's really taken off. It's got quite a few berries on it. This is the most productive one, and right here, nice clusters of berries. And these clusters are actually on a new plant that came up here away from the main plant. This is a pretty nice growing Tiff Blue. Over here across the fence, this Climax is a couple of years younger than the big Climax plant showed earlier, but look at the growth on this thing. That whole stem is new. All this top growth, I mean, that's like 1.5 feet of new growth there, and it's got quite a few berries as well. But Climax is the most vigorous grower here. I don't know if it just likes the soil better or if it's just that way normally, but it does bloom early, really early. That's the only drawback for Climax. Okay, here we are at the big premier blueberry tree up in the forest. Now this is the oldest plant that I have growing. This was planted about 7 years ago, and it is really loaded up this year. It's got a new sucker coming up out here from a year or two ago, and both of the plants are just loaded up. Now, a couple of things about this plant that goes against the common thinking, the common advice on blueberries. Now, this plant is growing in partial sun. It gets about 3 hours of sun a day. And they say to give blueberries full sun or they won't make a good fruit set. Well, that's disproven here because this has an awesome fruit set. And these berries get big. Premier berries have to be ripe, really ripe before they're great. But they get really big, and they are really great if you wait till the right time. And another thing that this plant kind of disproves from the common thinking is this was my first plant, and it was making berries, good berries set before I had any other Rabbiteye blueberries planted, any blueberries planted. This was the first one and the only one for several years, and it always set good berries for those years before there was any pollinators around. Now the pollinator plants now are 150 feet away, so I don't know how good they're actually doing this plant now. But as you can see, there's no problem with pollination whatsoever. So I know that Premier can set berries without a pollinator plant nearby. All right, well, thank you very much for joining me for this Rabbiteye blueberry video. I love blueberries, and I'm glad to be able to make this and bring it to you. Thank you very much to the subscribers to this channel, and we'll follow these blueberries through the season.